Pollyanna Whittier had never met her Aunt Polly before. But now, with her father gone and her mother already in heaven, she was on her way to live with this stern-sounding lady in the small town of Beldingsville, Vermont. As the train pulled into the station, Pollyanna clutched her worn suitcase and stepped onto the platform, her bright eyes scanning the crowd. She expected to see a kind-looking woman rushing to greet her. Instead, a young maid named Nancy approached, looking flustered and unsure. "You ain't her, Miss Polly, I mean," Pollyanna said cheerfully when she saw Nancy. "But I'm real glad just the same." Nancy stared, surprised. Most children might be scared or sad, not this girl. Pollyanna's new home was big, clean, and very stiff. Miss Polly Harrington lived by rules, her own very serious rules. She believed in duty and order, and thought emotions were best kept tucked away like winter blankets. When Pollyanna first stepped into the grand, quiet house, she thought it looked a little like a museum. Miss Polly gave her a quick, polite welcome, then laid down the rules. Meals at certain times, quiet in the halls, no interruptions, and absolutely no running. But Pollyanna didn't frown. She looked around the neat room, smiled wide and said, "Oh, Aunt Polly, I'm so glad you let me come. I've so wanted to live with you, and just think, I'm really here." Miss Polly was startled. She had taken the girl out of obligation. Her sister, the one who had married a poor minister and moved far away, had passed years ago. Now the minister was gone too, and the child had nowhere else to go. Still, Pollyanna's cheerfulness was unsettling. The girl didn't seem to understand when she was being corrected. She even seemed happy when she was given the attic room, far from the rest of the house. "Oh yes, I'm glad of it," Pollyanna said. "There's such a lot of windows, and I can see way off to the hills. I love hills, don't you, Aunt Polly?" Miss Polly only frowned slightly. One morning, Nancy found Pollyanna sitting on the attic floor, smiling at an empty trunk. "What in the world are you doing, miss?" Nancy asked. "I'm playing the glad game," Pollyanna said brightly. "Father taught it to me." "The what game?" "The glad game. You see, when things don't turn out right, or when you're disappointed, you just look for something to be glad about. Like once, the mission board sent me crutches instead of a doll, and I was so disappointed. But Father said to be glad I didn't need the crutches. So we were." Nancy blinked. She wasn't used to this kind of talk, but something about it stayed with her. As the days passed, Pollyanna's gladness seemed to spread like sunshine. She greeted everyone with joy, whether it was the stiff housekeeper, the grocer in town, or the children she passed on the street. She found good things to say about cloudy skies and burned toast. Miss Polly, however, remained proper and distant. She believed a child should be taught, not spoiled, and certainly not allowed to talk so much. Still, she watched her niece from the corner of her eye. It puzzled her how Pollyanna always found something to smile about. Even when Miss Polly handed her plain clothes and said there would be no fancy frills, Pollyanna clapped her hands. "Oh, I'm glad. Think how much easier they'll be to iron." Miss Polly didn't say anything, but for the first time in years she felt unsure of herself. And so Pollyanna settled into her new life, not with tears or complaints, but with joy in her heart and gladness in her step. Even in a house full of rules, her happiness found ways to bloom. It didn't take long for Pollyanna's sunshine to spill out of Miss Polly's house and into the streets of Beldingsville. Pollyanna loved to explore, and she soon learned every corner of the little town. She skipped past tall fences, peeked into shady gardens, and waved to people who often weren't used to being waved at. Some folks stared, others smiled back, surprised to see such a cheerful child out and about. Every few days Pollyanna visited the big lonely house. She talked about her father, her glad game, and all the people she met in town. As summer wore on, people began to notice something strange. They were smiling more. They were complaining less. Even the grocer, who never had a kind word, had begun to whistle in the mornings. And at the heart of it all was Pollyanna, still wearing plain clothes, still living in the attic, still playing her game. She was changing the town, one heart at a time. Even Aunt Polly, though she'd never admit it, was starting to feel the difference. Her home didn't seem so quiet anymore, or maybe, for the first time in years, it felt alive. Miss Polly Harrington was a woman who had spent most of her life doing what she believed was right. She ran her house by strict rules, wore stiff collars, and believed in good manners over warm hugs. To her, emotions were messy and unnecessary things. But ever since Pollyanna had arrived, things had started to change. At first, Miss Polly tried to keep her distance. She gave orders, set limits, and kept her voice firm. But no matter what she said or did, Pollyanna always smiled, always thanked her, and always found a way to be glad. One morning, Pollyanna said cheerfully, "I'm glad you're so good at deciding things, Aunt Polly. It makes me feel safe." Miss Polly blinked. She wasn't used to being thanked for her rules. It confused her. She began to notice little things. How Pollyanna made Nancy laugh in the kitchen. How she hummed to herself while dusting. How the house felt a bit warmer, like a window had been opened and fresh air was blowing through. Late one evening, Miss Polly stood outside Pollyanna's bedroom door and listened. Inside, the girl was talking softly to herself. "I'm glad Aunt Polly let me help with the missionary barrel today. I know she didn't want to, but maybe now she'll feel glad too." Miss Polly turned away quickly. Something in her chest was tightening, and not in the usual way. Pollyanna had a way of bringing up things Miss Polly didn't want to talk about, like love and kindness and Dr. Chilton. She'd say things like, "Aunt Polly, don't you think it's nice that Dr. Chilton always smiles when he sees you?" Or, "He seems so kind. I think he'd make someone a lovely husband someday." Miss Polly would turn red and change the subject. But in truth, long ago, she had loved Dr. Chilton. And when they'd quarreled and gone their separate ways, she'd buried that feeling deep, deep down. Now, this sunny little girl was digging it back up without even trying. Bit by bit, something inside Miss Polly was softening. Not like butter melting, but more like the slow thaw of ice in the spring. And though she didn't say it out loud, she had started looking forward to hearing Pollyanna's footsteps, to seeing her bright face at breakfast, to listening to her endless list of things she was glad about. Even rules, Miss Polly was starting to realize, could bend, just a little, for love. Summer had begun to slip into early fall. The air was cooler now, and the leaves on the trees were just starting to change color. But Pollyanna was still the same, bright and cheerful, skipping through town with a happy word for everyone. People had started watching for her. Mrs. Snow looked forward to her visits and even asked for prettier blankets on her bed. Mr. Pendleton had started planting flowers in his lonely yard, for when Pollyanna comes to call. And Jimmy Bean, now with a roof over his head, followed her around like a little brother. But something was different in Pollyanna too. She didn't talk about just the glad game anymore, she was living it without even thinking. She had given so much gladness to others that it seemed to shine out of her wherever she went. Then, one grey afternoon, something happened that no one expected. Pollyanna was on her way home from a visit when she saw a friend on the other side of the street and waved. She stepped off the curb without looking carefully, just as a motorcar came speeding around the corner. There was a loud screech of brakes, a shout, and then silence. People came running. The driver jumped from the car. And Pollyanna, brave, bright Pollyanna, was lying still on the ground. She was carried back to Miss Polly's house right away. The doctor was called and Nancy stayed at her side, pale with worry. Miss Polly didn't speak. She only held Pollyanna's hand and stared at her face. The next morning the doctor gave his news. "There's been damage to her spine," he said quietly. "She may never walk again." Miss Polly stood very still. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Pollyanna was her girl now. Her responsibility. And suddenly, she realized just how much she loved her. When Pollyanna woke and learned what had happened, she didn't cry either. Not at first. But then she whispered, "Aunt Polly, I can't ever go out and see things again. Never run or skip." Miss Polly sat beside her and gently smoothed her hair. "We'll do everything we can," she said softly. "Everything." At first Pollyanna tried to play the glad game. She smiled when the sun came through her window. She said she was glad for books, for Nancy, and for jelly on her toast. But after a few days her smile faded. One afternoon she turned her face toward the wall and whispered, "There isn't anything to be glad about now." Nancy heard it, and her heart broke a little. The news spread quickly through town. People who had once ignored the little girl now spoke about her in hushed tones. Mr. Pendleton paced his hallways. Mrs. Snow asked if she could visit Pollyanna in person. Even the grocer sent a basket of sweet oranges just in case she wakes up wanting one. Everyone was worried, because they all knew deep down that Beldingsville without Pollyanna just wouldn't be the same. In her room, Pollyanna lay quietly. Her legs wouldn't move. The days passed slowly. But the house was different now. Miss Polly stayed by her side almost constantly. She spoke gently, held Pollyanna's hand, and kissed her forehead when she thought no one was looking. Even Dr. Chilton began to visit more often, though he said little. He and Miss Polly would stand outside Pollyanna's room in long, quiet talks. Pollyanna didn't know it yet, but something was happening. Her sadness had reached the people she loved, and now they were about to show her just how much she meant to them. The days after Pollyanna's accident were long and quiet. She lay in her bed, her legs still and heavy under the blankets. Sometimes she stared at the ceiling for hours, not saying a word. Other times she asked about the town, about Jimmy, about Nancy, about the people she used to visit. But she didn't talk about the glad game anymore. Not once. Miss Polly sat with her every day. She brushed Pollyanna's hair, read her books, and brought her small treats, even lemon pie, which had never been allowed before. But Pollyanna didn't smile. It hurt Miss Polly to see her that way. More than anything else. It hurt to know that the one thing Pollyanna had always given to others, hope, was now slipping away from her. One afternoon Dr. Chilton came to the house. He was quiet and serious as he stepped into the parlor where Miss Polly was waiting. "I've come to talk about Pollyanna," he said. Miss Polly nodded. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "I've written to a hospital in Boston," Dr. Chilton continued. "There are new treatments. A special surgeon. I believe if Pollyanna can get there soon, there's a chance she might walk again." Miss Polly sat very still. Hope was a strange feeling, almost like fear but brighter. "You truly believe so?" she whispered. "I do," Dr. Chilton said gently. That night, Miss Polly told Pollyanna the news. "There's a doctor in Boston who may be able to help you." she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Would you be willing to go, dear? Pollyanna looked up at her aunt's face. For a moment her eyes filled with something like the old spark. Oh, Aunt Polly, she whispered. Do you want me to go? Miss Polly leaned close and took the girl's hand. Yes, Pollyanna, she said softly. I want you to go, because I love you. For a second, Pollyanna didn't speak. Then, with a little sigh, she closed her eyes. I'm glad, she breathed. So glad you said that. The next few days were full of quiet bustle. Nancy packed Pollyanna's things. The townspeople sent small gifts and notes. Mr. Pendleton came to visit, standing in the doorway with a worried frown and a gentle smile. Even Mrs. Snow sent her favorite pillow with the good feathers. Jimmy Bean cried when Pollyanna said goodbye. I'll write, she promised, and I'll try very hard to come back walking. Nancy and Miss Polly went with her to the train station. The sky was grey and the platform was chilly, but Pollyanna's cheeks were pink with excitement. She looked out the window one last time before the train pulled away. And then she was gone, riding off towards something that might be a miracle. Back at the house, everything felt different. Too quiet. Too still. Miss Polly sat by the window each evening waiting for news. She thought about Pollyanna's laughter, her chatter, the way she had filled every corner of the house with gladness. Dr. Chilton came often to check on her, and not just because of Pollyanna. The two of them, once so distant, had begun to speak more gently now. Sometimes they even smiled at each other, remembering a time long ago when they hadn't needed so many words. And though Pollyanna was far away, her spirit, her hope, seemed to stay behind, quietly growing like sunlight behind a cloud. Miss Polly had once believed in rules. Now she was beginning to believe in miracles. The house on the hill felt empty without Pollyanna. Nancy went about her chores quietly, often wiping her eyes on her apron. Miss Polly moved through her days slowly, missing the cheerful voice that used to greet her each morning, and the gentle questions Pollyanna always asked at bedtime. Even the neighbors noticed. Mr. Pendleton stopped tending his garden. Mrs. Snow asked less about her own aches and more about Pollyanna's progress in Boston. And Jimmy Bean, once full of jokes, walked through town with his hands in his pockets, looking down at his shoes. Each week a letter came from Boston. At first they were short and careful. She is comfortable, the doctors wrote. She is hopeful. Then one day a new note arrived, this time from Pollyanna herself. It said only, Aunt Polly, I'm glad, truly glad. The doctor says I can walk someday soon. Miss Polly read the words twice. Then she sat very still in her chair, held the letter to her chest and whispered, Thank God. Not long after that, Pollyanna came home. The whole town seemed to hold its breath as the train arrived. Nancy rushed to meet her, her arms full of flowers. Miss Polly stood quietly by the platform, waiting for the first glimpse of her girl. And there she was, leaning on the arm of a nurse, but smiling just the same. Pollyanna had changed. She was a little thinner, a little quieter. But her eyes still sparkled, and her voice still had that soft, happy ring to it. Aunt Polly! She cried as soon as she saw her. Oh, I've missed you so much. Miss Polly didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around Pollyanna and held her close, right there in front of everyone. I'm so glad you're home, she whispered. Back at the house, things slowly returned to life. The attic room was warm and cozy again. Pollyanna still needed help getting around, but her legs were stronger every day. The nurse said it would take time, but Pollyanna didn't mind. I'm so glad just to be able to feel them again, she told Nancy with a grin. She began receiving visitors once more. Mr. Pendleton came with a bouquet of garden roses. Mrs. Snow sent fresh muffins. Jimmy Bean brought a wildflower he picked himself and sat beside Pollyanna on the porch swing for hours. "You're the same," he said with a smile. "Only, even better." One afternoon, Pollyanna sat outside with her aunt watching the wind move through the trees. "Aunt Polly," she said quietly, "do you remember when you didn't want me to come live with you?" Miss Polly looked at her with soft eyes. "Yes, I remember. And I was wrong." Pollyanna reached out and took her aunt's hand. "I'm glad you changed your mind." "So am I, my dear," said Miss Polly. "So am I." There was one more change too, one Pollyanna had always hoped for without quite knowing it. Dr. Chilton came to the house more and more often. He no longer looked so serious, and Miss Polly no longer looked away when he entered the room. They spoke kindly now, sometimes walking in the garden together. One day Pollyanna saw them from her window, and her smile stretched from ear to ear. "Oh, I am glad," she whispered to herself. "Glad, glad, glad." And so Pollyanna's story didn't end with sadness. It ended with healing. Not just for her legs, but for hearts that had once been closed. Through love, courage, and a simple game about being glad, Pollyanna had changed her world. And her world had changed her too,